Welcome to the stream. I think that we are on. Yes, we're live now. So welcome to the stream. We are going to be talking about modern culture, freedom, and progress. And we have here Zarathustra Serpent and Missing the Mark. So just a clarification. Last week, Zarathustra Serpent made a video about, I think it was entitled "Why Freedom Will Win." And I did a response video, and then subsequently, Missing the Mark, Christopher did a response video to my video. And I think we have just very different opinions about, how culture moves, the flow of progress, so on and so forth. So how about I start, since you made the original video, Zarathustra Serpent, do you just want to summarize your position, and then we can kind of bring our own perspectives in on the question?
Okay, yeah, well, my video was basically a response to the fact that a lot of people seem to be pessimistic about the future, seeing all the voices of unfreedom that are popping up. And I was just saying that I believe that Western culture is very strong and will defeat will defeat its enemies, the enemies of liberalism. Basically, when I say freedom, I define it as the liberal democracy, like you have in the West today. And I was showing how even the more shallow expressions of it, of this culture, are powerful. When people from unfree cultures, encounter them, things that we think of as kind of shallow expressions, for them it still carries enough of the freedom of the spirit of Western freedom that it can have an effect on people. And I was saying. And Western culture creates every year millions of such artifacts that can have such an effect. And because of that, I'm very optimistic. And the video is kind of very lighthearted and tongue-in-cheek.
No, I think you were right. One thing I think we both agree on, just to kind of start this up on an agreement, is that this position about sort of freedom being extended materialistically through popular culture was one that kind of got very popular and sort of had its popularity not peak, but really its popularity exploded out of the early 90s and into the late 90s, and sort of persisted throughout a lot of the early 2000s and 2010s, and is at this point this position is starting to become challenged in our present age. It's a position that I myself challenge for a variety of reasons. But I think we both agree that the idea that sort of consumer culture would be the salvation of the world was something that sort of came out of this 90s attitude, this end of history type perspective that you see in a bunch of people like Francis Fukuyama and stuff like that.
But you call it consumer culture, but to me, I come from philosophy, and my exploration is into. I basically write the philosophy of pop culture, and to me, pop culture. When I look at popular, we call it pop kind of as an ideology, but it's popular culture. To me, has been the driving force always. We're going to get into that, but. So I don't see that as anything. There's this tendency to see consumer culture as something that stands against traditional Western culture, or high culture. And what I'm saying is it's not against. It's the same thing. It's a continuation of the same thing.
Well, actually, I might agree with you here. The problem, I mean, I would say that, in a lot of ways, right, high culture proceeds from a low culture, right? In a response to me in my comment section, you said something like, along the lines of, of these things like Shakespeare, and there was a certain component of them that was popular, and then it was adopted into the high culture later. And indeed, you could argue, I mean, Shakespeare might be a little bit of a stretch because he was really playing more to the middle and upper middle classes at his time. But I agree with you, a lot of the stuff that you see in high culture, it's sort of something that's intellectualized out of a lower culture incarnation. The difficulty I have with modern pop culture is that I think that the modern SJW is the high culture intellectualization of the core pop culture philosophy. And so that creates kind of a problem for you because, I mean, people who the intellectualization of the Backstreet Boys is not it's not Shakespeare, it's not Plato, it's intersectionality. It's identitarian politics that plays on sexuality as the primary form of identity.
But I wasn't claiming that the Backstreet Boys are high culture. I was giving them as...
No, I'm not claiming that either. No. What I'm claiming is that the high culture that was built on the Backstreet Boys is the SJWs. They are the high culture version.
No, I don't agree with that because the SJWs, come on, they come from neo-Marxism and stuff that is stuff like Adorno, people who are against pop culture. SJWs are against pop culture. And
well, maybe. I mean, right now they're essentially trying to control it and make it ideological, right?
Well, yeah, I think you can argue to a great degree they often feed off of it more than even necessarily are trying to control it. In a way that schools of fish, there isn't a leader, just a lot of them, sort of by following each other go in a direction. A lot of the critiques that you see, I think, are individuals trying to score their own points, and just happens with lots trying to do the same thing simultaneously, that they sort of move like a school in a direction.
Well, like someone like Miley Cyrus or Caitlyn Jenner were highly linked to this popular culture.
Yeah, but look, every medium when it is popular, 90% of what it creates is basically mediocre garbage. And within it there are the gems of that are that have a deeper power, have more power, that go deeper spiritually, and affect people more strongly. And later, those are the things that we remember. Those are the things that remain and become high culture, become masterpieces of high culture, which are remembered by the next generations as basically as the high culture, part of Western high culture. So
no, I agree.
Anything that's
process sort of generally there. I think what the difference between your position and my position, and perhaps Christopher's position, is that we think something sort of horrendously wrong is currently occurring in Western culture, and this is both manifested in pop culture and high culture.
I don't see it as different than things that have been happening in the past. Look, this there's this SJWs are basically, and there's also the rise now of communists. It's radical left. Now the radical left, this incarnation is weaker than previous incarnations of the radical left. It's weaker and a lot more ridiculous. Which
I would also contest that. That's the thing, right? I mean, we can.
Well, I would contest it, I think, for a somewhat different reason, because I think you would contest it. Distributist, or how should I refer to you?
You can say Dave. I'm basically going to change my name to Dave the Distributist, just because no one can pronounce distributist. It's always distributionist. Okay, but yeah, just you can call me Dave.
Anyway, because I think your critique tends to be on the present power, whereas my critique of that would come rather from a different direction. That Marxism is in general a secular religion, a secular religion substitute more properly.
But I would agree with that. Yes,
and that's where I see it deriving its power from, especially long term. Why is this ridiculous thing that has proven an insane failure everywhere it's been tried still popular? It sort of defies belief except as a religion substitute, I think. And as we see the development of the dominant religion like Christianity, you're going to see, I mean, people need some reason to continue living, and secular religions then will rush to fill that void. And so I don't see many other, Marxism has a lot of properties that make it a reasonably viable secular religion. I don't see many other secular religions that are viable substitutes alongside Marxism. So my question there, in terms of how would this not be, getting stronger, is what other viable replacement for secular religion is around as a candidate to take over in place of Marxism for all those people who are not going to be, outright religious?
I mean, something that sort of hooks in with the idea that the pop culture is separated from a larger ethos, and so it's trying to reach out for some ideology to guide its high culture and its in its larger questions, and it only has Marxism to put in its place, right?
Okay, Marxism, I agree, is a religion. It's based basically on blind faith in the belief that people are equal. That if we basically that they are born equal, and if only the system was right, they will be happy living equally in a communist society. That's the blind faith that Marxism is based on.
But also that offers salvation as well.
Yes.
Because I mean, everyone has an intuitive sense that something's wrong with this world. So
yes, the salvation is based on the idea that humans are meant to live in a communist society which is free, and basically the idea is that there will be no need for government in such a society.
Yeah, people are perfectible through education.
Yeah. Now, pop culture basically is a substitute for religion. I'm basically, that's what I'm writing, this philosophy of pop culture. I understand it more through a lens that is more Nietzschean, which is about, so in the 20th century it was about music, mostly pop music, which was about musical styles, each of which was basically the truth of its time. There's a different there's a metaphysical change that happens within pop culture, which truth no longer is seen as something eternal, but as something that is of this moment. Every moment has its own truth, and we are trying to live the truth of the moment.
I mean, are you saying contemporary pop culture? Because that certainly wasn't an element of previous iterations of popular culture that people would consume 200 years ago.
No, it changes, of course. I talk about the 20th century, and the pop culture basically from the 20th century, the pop culture that was based
I think I would agree with you on this. I think
from jazz to
I think the
later,
transformation of pop culture essentially has come to a point where truth is totally individuated, right? That it's there no longer is some kind of external true reality, and that it's totally created around the individual, and
it's not individual, it's about groups. It's about groups, not about individuals. The communities, and I think that now that was 20th century. Now we are moving towards this idea of universes, of all those pop culture artifacts have become universes of their own. There's the universe of Star Wars, the universe of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the universe of the Marvel comics, Harry Potter, and also the universes of the metal music and punk, and they're creating their own worlds on the internet, and I think through video games will develop those worlds through virtual reality and all that, and this is where I see the future going. So we're living in a different metaphysics now, in which basically it's about, we are moving from a world of work to a world of play, which this world there will be, but this is the future. Yes, our world will just be a platform from which we go into different worlds and.
But doesn't this sort of like get to the point that I was trying to make, that this iteration of pop culture is fundamentally different from previous ones?
No, I think it's just developed from different. I think the metaphysics change.
You just mentioned about it being sort of individuated and focused on universes is something that previous iterations wouldn't have had. Previous iterations of pop culture also would have had strong moralisms embedded within them, which the present pop culture doesn't have.
Morality. Well, there's always the people who are trying to find the morality of that will fit the time, and yeah, it's an ongoing project. But basically, the thing is that why is this described of things that come from popular culture then become high culture? Because popular culture, high culture is based on all its art. The artifacts that are made within high culture are already based on very strong ideas of what is good, what is beautiful, what is right, whereas pop culture is more free, and so it has. People are free, and sometimes they just create what looks good to them, what feels good.
But previous iterations of pop culture would not have had that attitude, say in the 19th century. Popular culture in the 19th century Europe would have been highly moralistic in its inception and in its communication. Right. The idea that you'd have this totally liberated pop culture is something that you really only see in the 20th century, and even in, really, frankly, it's something that's been developing over the course of the last half of the 20th century, I would argue.
Look, what's the popular culture of 19th century? In the middle of the 19th century,
Horatio Alger, for instance, that would be an example.
Who?
Horatio Alger stories would be an example. Pop comics about cowboys would be an example. These all essentially, before that it would be like morality plays, right?
I think in the middle of the 19th century, the grand opera was the popular culture,
which is another highly moralistic medium, though.
Okay, but people would go there to see. I don't know how much, because it was the spectacle. It was a big spectacle, and with all sorts of wars and things like that, and
well, yeah, but I mean the idea that opera was not popular culture; it was high culture. But even then, I mean the people who wrote the libretto, they had these highly defined concepts of ethics and aesthetics that they were trying to communicate with these big spectacles. I mean that was intentionally written in for the most part.
If it's, I mean, you have that today as well. It's not that when you write a TV show or something like that, the TV series, also you deal with moral questions. Any science fiction, or not any, but a lot of the science fiction books and TV shows and movies have a philosophical and moral discussion. So in the 19th century, okay, so you had the grand opera, and most of it is not remembered today because it was mediocre rubbish, but there was Wagner, and Wagner was had ideas which at the time were laughed at. He was seen as just someone who creates popular culture. But
no, what are you talking about?
Oh, yes, he was. Yes, he was.
Wagner was not seen as a person who just created popular culture. This guy was considered an intellectual of his time. He was addressed directly by Nietzsche, and he was.
Yes.
He was. I mean, I don't know. I mean, he had an idea of himself as a guy that was essentially he was essentially saw himself as a leader that would recreate Germany with his music. You could argue that people laughed at him, but I mean, he was not somebody. A lot of people thought he was right. A lot of people thought that this guy was like this great ideologue. I mean,
you need the new generation, people like Nietzsche, who were younger and came in and understood him on the deeper level, and started writing about him differently from what the intellectuals of that happened in the 1870s. Before that, Wagner was seen as an entertainer, and he didn't see himself as an entertainer, but others, because he was working in the popular medium of opera, they saw him as an entertainer, and then intellectuals like Nietzsche came in and started to philosophize about it and made people look at him differently. So this is what happens. There's always in the popular mediums people who are more serious, that are laughed at the time because they are working within a popular medium, but later it becomes high culture when people start looking into it, and because, like I said, in popular culture, you have in popular medium you have the freedom to try out things, and sometimes you find an intuition that if it feels good, but you can't explain it. I mean, that's what art is about. It's something that feels right, but you can't explain why. You can't explain within your rationalism.
But is there a possibility
on top of that, you later build the rationalism, and then you can explain it retroactively. And this is what happens with art, and it happens basically mostly within popular mediums, because they have the freedom to do that, to do what feels good and not what is defined as good by the rationality of the time.
Well, I mean, do you think a culture, though, can go off the rails, that it can essentially descend into decadence? They can develop incredibly bad pop culture ideas that then turn into incredibly bad high culture ideas?
I think it can happen. I think we need
because the case I would be making is that this is what we were observing right now.
Well, look, but like I said, it always happened. There was always mostly bad. Most of the things that were created were bad, and bad ideas existed always. So I don't see it as different. And yes, there is the danger, but you have to fight to prevent it. You have to focus on the good stuff and
yeah, I get what you're saying.
Create good ideas.
You know, I mean, for me, you know, for me, you know, I see modern Western culture, or I don't even think it's really Western anymore. The academy and the arts are dominated by what we would call SJWs. I think we might disagree on that, but from my perspective, they just control everything. And it's not passive either, right? I mean, you've got like these Google vice presidents like coming back from their vacation just so they can personally fire somebody who posted like wrongthink on a Google forum that was supposed to be about discussing ideas.
Yeah.
That's pretty active, right?
I think bring this back to where, sort of how things are going, where they're going. There seems to me a lot to be one problem with your thesis with regard to the optimism that you were talking about, which is that the unending change of the thing suggests a churning over too of the very Western values you think that popular culture embeds within it, that it spreads. And I mean, you can see this in I mean, it's not like popular culture is purely being exported from the West anymore. There's a fair amount of popular culture being created outside of the West. You know, whether you're talking about Bollywood or you know, Chinese are increasingly controlling, and so on. So, I mean, I mean, wouldn't your thesis rely on the idea that Western popular culture will dominate in the marketplace of popular culture?
I think that the popular culture that's coming out of where is it coming out of? India is a democracy. Japan is a democracy. Those are liberal democracies. Maybe India is not exactly a liberal democracy as we have in the West, but they're trying. So I think it is a free society, and I think popular culture is being. it's not that powerful, you know, the Indian popular culture. We consume a little bit of it, but it comes out of liberal democracies. Japan is a strong pop country now, but it is a liberal democracy. So I don't have I didn't really define it as like I said, I define freedom as liberal democracy, not as Western liberal democracy.
Oh, that's fair enough. I mean, you know, the thing is that I mean, like the sort of counterexamples I would offer are just things like China and Turkey, right? I mean, these, you know, we've kind of seen this. I mean, I guess the question is, you know, what's sort of odd, the weird thing that's happening in the West right now, right, is it to me and people on the conservative side, it seems like the West is being devoured by these sort of highly progressive / you know, potentially Marxist ideas that are causing them to essentially destroy their own institutions. You know,
okay. Yeah.
And you know, and then we have essentially what amounts to what I would say a halting of the expansion of the liberal democratic model worldwide. And these are two things that the sort of pop culture indefinitely expands liberal democracy theory doesn't account for. If pop culture, you know, indefinitely expands liberal democracy, then why have we reached a point where it seems that, you know, the classes responsible for creating pop culture and education are essentially cannibalizing their own cultural system? And then also, if this pop culture indefinitely expands liberal democracy, then why are we seeing the process that we saw start in the 90s essentially being halted right now?
Okay, so there's a lot there. So let's begin with my position. First of all, about the fact that the West is being taken over by these regressive types, SJWs. First of all, they're still conservatives, and I'm a liberal on the left, but I'm different from those regressives in that I don't want to destroy the conservatives. I think the conservatives are necessary for me to exist, to try out new stuff, yeah, for liberal society to try out things, and conservatives to basically maintain the high culture, and in this and this interaction between them is the thing that weeds out, in the end, weeds out the bad ideas and the bad popular culture, and just then embeds and takes the good ideas and the good creations that are being made, and makes them part of high culture and part of the tradition. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I don't agree that academy and media and all that is being controlled by SJWs. They are being controlled by what are called passive regressives, which basically what I define as regressive, I have an entire series on it on my channel. What I define as regressive left is radical left, what we talked before about people who believe in utopianism based on the idea that on the blind faith that human nature is to live in a communist society. They have that mentality, but since it's not popular anymore, communism is not popular anymore, they basically disguise it by pretending to be liberals, to themselves even. They're not aware that they are Marxists, basically. So they will tell, you know, they will talk about things like the pay gap, which why is it wrong? Well, it's they can't point out to discrimination that creates the gender pay gap, but it is wrong because in their mind, if there wasn't discrimination, we would have equality.
I mean, this gender pay gap, this is an idea that's 30 years old. I mean, and it's been demonstrably wrong for 30 years. So, I mean, a theory is going to have to explain why this idea has essentially, become mainstream after being laughable and highly circulated in the academy. I mean, the academy, to my mind, there's nothing passive about the academy. The people who run this thing are on board with the most extreme ideas you can imagine. For instance, in my home state, California, you have all sorts of really, really weird legislation coming out, right? Like this most recently, a decriminalization effort against people who spread AIDS to other people knowingly.
Yeah.
How is this? I don't understand. You know, you could say that it's incompetence, right? I think that might be a refuge for this theory. Now, there's the famous rule of thumb: never attribute to malice what can be attributed to incompetence. But even if it is incompetence, it's not a very passive one. You know, these things don't happen without a major blind spot, right?
The blind spot, exactly. The passivity is look, the regressives are pushing this. You know, they are pushing the radical views, but because it is disguised as liberalism, people who are not really paying attention that they are liberals, and you know, so when they hear that women are being discriminated against in the workplace, they'll say, "Oh, we need to do something about it." So if they realize that it comes from a communist worldview, they would say, no, we're not communists. But
I mean, how did the 90s end under this idea, right? Because that's what I thought, like in the 90s, I'm like, okay, well, discrimination might exist and we'll handle it on a case-to-case basis. But that's manifestly not what happened, right? What happened was they institutionalized these theories about discrimination to create an apparatus through which they could essentially exert cultural pressure on any institution that opposed them.
Because it found a way to disguise itself, basically by using postmodernist thinking to disguise its Marxist heart. Yeah, it's basically what I call regressive left is basically neo-Marxism disguised as using postmodernism to disguise itself as liberalism, as we are just fighting against discrimination. When it's not.
Why did this only happen in the West? I guess, right? It's just, I don't know. There's just a lot of questions I have about this, right? I mean, to me, I guess it's just really hard to isolate it from a larger cultural decline.
Can I get a quick clarification definition of terms, Alad? How would you define an illiberal democracy?
Oh. A country that has a democratic constitution, for instance, but is very corrupt, and almost every country in the world today is defined as a democracy. Its system is defined as democracy. It holds elections, democratic elections, and both mostly multi-party, but the elections are not fair and what's the other word? There's another word that so the elections are not really fair. It doesn't have things like, you know, freedom of speech and all sorts of things that democracy is based on. You will not have in an illiberal democracy. Ethiopia is a democracy in its the way it defines itself. Okay, it has elections, has democratic elections, but there's nothing democratic about it. There's nothing liberal because it's basically a dictatorship.
So what about democracy? Internationally speaking, like, whose idea of free speech are you referencing? Because, for example, Americans have a much broader view of free speech than many other countries do. As I understand it, much of Europe considers itself to have free speech, and yet by American standards, we tend to look at Europe and see speech as being fairly curtailed. There being all sorts of things that, they have things like hate crime legislation, where there are ideas that you can be imprisoned for saying in public.
Yes.
So whose idea of free speech are you using?
To me, free speech is an American, the American definition, and the fact that Europe is different is a bit means that it's a little bit less liberal in its democracy. But still, I mean, there's still liberal democracies. Yeah, so it has flaws. America does too. So
the problem I'm dealing with, though, just sort of back on the discussion, is just that it's just this. At this point, there's almost nothing I couldn't imagine a mainstream institution doing in terms of illiberalism on a 30-year time frame, right? If you poll contemporary college students, they think that hate speech isn't free speech. and they're going to be the new leaders. So we're entering a world where I don't understand. I don't understand how any of these. What guarantees can I expect to be guarded against? Right? If this ideology has taken root to the extent that it has, I'm not so sure. I can't expect people to say not come after me for my beliefs if they get labeled hate speech.
Yeah, but I mean, again, look back at the 60s and look what was happening in the academies. You will see basically communists in the Western academies.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could argue that this essentially, in some sense, comes from communism. But I guess the question is this sort of disrupts the notion that there's a sort of inevitable progress towards.
I didn't say there was inevitable. I didn't say there was inevitable.
Okay, pardon me.
But your video, you did call them the designated losers.
Yes,
which sounded remarkably like inevitability, at least.
Because I see them because they're so ridiculous. And look, they may in the academy they may sound. I think the academy is completely detached from what's going on. And when you look at society, you see people are sick of this nonsense.
It's not just it's the academy and the media and the corporations and the people who make up all the appointments underneath the actual elected officials for the most part. I mean, this is a substantial portion of the power base of the West at this point, right? Now, just to give Europe, for instance, right? Like they had NGOs literally going to Libya, picking up people and transporting them into the continent, and the bureaucracy would cooperate with that, right? I mean, at this stage, the institutions are so thoroughly, infected by these ideas, it's hard for me to really dismiss them as a fringe anymore, right?
But when I listen to the people, to those to people who are in power, they don't have social justice ideals. They are not ideologues. They are just, like I said, passive aggressives. They are affected by this, and they think that they are doing the right thing because that's what the regressives are telling them. They think it's liberal what they're doing. Basically, they are being hoodwinked. They're being taken for a ride at the moment, and I think that so they just need to be woken up, and this is what we're working on. And I think that we are going to win because it is really it's crumbling. Whenever you look at what's happening on the internet, on YouTube, just the SJWs.
YouTube is a platform controlled by a corporation that just fired somebody for saying much less radical opinions than I say regularly in my YouTube channel. Like, just to be clear about what YouTube actually is. Right, whatever voice we have right now, we're eating out of the hands of the people who think that this opinion is wrong.
Okay, but let me give you two historical instances. Okay, in the 15th century, you had a small group of a few hundred people, of Renaissance artists and thinkers, who were eating out of the hand of the church and creating art and philosophy, which eventually brought the rise of a more secular, basically brought about our world that is more secular, in which the power of the church is diminished. In the 18th century, you had, again, a small group of a few thousand artists and thinkers who were the Enlightenment.
This sounds very different from someone with my perspective than it would for yours.
Well, yeah, Catholics look on some of that stuff a little differently, but in any event, just historically speaking, the rise of the secularism that you see starting around the 1500s had a number of rather military causes, with external pressure from Islam draining a number of resources and then allowing the large number of relatively small kingdoms that the princes of the time were heavily constrained in various things of warfare they could do by the church around, and their move away involved seizing. Basically, the princes of the time, a lot of them saw the ability to seize church lands and money and escapes
I
getting
can
control.
put this a little bit more succinctly. All throughout the Middle Ages, the argument largely was won over the Ghibellines versus the Guelphs, which broadly segmented into the rights of the Holy Roman Empire versus the rights of the church directly. And you could see the Reformation as being the final break in that political dispensation, with the breakaway very much being a secular power grab on the part of German princes and other powers who were essentially sick of the Pope prioritizing French interests. So but for somebody in my perspective, this
fighting to a détente, by the way, and that fighting to a, I mean, because a lot of the freedom that we talk about is essentially, like freedom of speech and so on, is heavily a result of the détente of people who can't beat each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was created. It was the idea of these sort of Enlightenment freedoms were extensions of freedoms developed in the wake of things like the 30-year war, where countries decided that they had to essentially expand liberty in the absence of having just uniformity, right? And I think due to how Christian society was set up, this worked. It would have looked very different if this kind of war had been fought in something like the Arab world, or the Arab world would be an example. Right?
And this is where the Renaissance comes in. I mean, it gives you the ideas, the spiritual ideas that could then feed the rise of secularism. Well,
let me ask.
So, like the French Revolution you mentioned, that was like the product of these, and the French Revolution was, to my mind, it was just a disastrous affair that led straight to chaos, and it was only rectified by people coming in and actually, establishing order in a way that was sort of totally counter to the original inception of the revolution.
Yes, because it was based on silly ideas, radical ideas, but it also contained some of the ideas of freedom that would be fixed and become something that does work. Like I said, you need this interaction between conservatives and liberals, those who come up with new ideas and those who hold them back to because a lot of the new ideas are stupid and bad.
Well, let me ask this question, just from a secular perspective, in purely secular terms. What is the good reason to tolerate people saying things that you think are harmful? This is free. I mean, this is the always the test of free speech is when you hear somebody saying something that you think is harmful for them to be saying. Why should you let them say it if you have the power to stop them?
I don't think I know the truth. And like I said, in this pop philosophy, the truth is ever changing. So you want people to challenge you all the time, so you can break away of what you are now and establish yourself anew. So you want a pluralist society where you can have many ideas which challenge each other. So you can, when your old worldview becomes basically no longer good, no longer fun, no longer so then you can break away from it and create something new. So you want so that's why you need a free and pluralist society. That's one reason.
I guess this is just sort of a fundamental difference between your perspective and mine. I fundamentally question a lot of the assumptions going into this, and I think that a lot of this is sort of like it's sort of held up behind the scenes by cultural assumptions, right? I think that if you're in a democracy, and if you're in a democracy where people can use the power of the vote to vote wealth to themselves, then it immediately becomes highly profitable to you to create political coalitions that can take power in the state and then vote the wealth of the polis to your particular interest group. And so democracies, quote unquote, as the founding fathers realized, always had to have some kind of guard against people doing this. And this is sort of the point in my video, is that the founding fathers understood that at the end of the day, right, you know, you could put like cultural institutional guards on this power, but at the end of the day, the guards that kept people from doing this were essentially moralistic, cultural, and religious. And that these moralistic culture, and you know, people, the Frenchmen, like what's Democracy in America, what's his name,
de Tocqueville.
De Tocqueville, thank you. He understood this as well as being the fundamental reason why the American Revolution succeeded while the French Revolution sent it into chaos. Is that you know, you need to have some force stopping the people from voting the wealth of the polis to their interest group, or you know. And the thing is that if you unleash the forces of revolution, you know, they're going to melt down every single moral, cultural, and institutional and religious thing that could possibly constrain the democratic force from devouring itself. But the problem, however, is this secularization process, insofar as it created liberty, also created a mechanism by which the only thing that guaranteed virtue, which would ultimately guarantee liberty, could also be burnt away, melted away. And what we're seeing right now in this age is this fundamental break from the pattern you described. Right, the pattern you described before was an institution is causing a constraint on freedom. Let's delete that institution such that such that we can regulate human behavior by the natural morals we have instilled culturally. But now, thanks to cultural relativism and multiculturalism, all of those institutions, those implicit institutions, whether they're religious or cultural, are now in the process of melting down. And we're now facing the prospect of essentially having political coalitions seize the wealth of the polis democratically and vote it to themselves, which will be the ultimate end of democracy, no matter how you slice it. Pardon me for the rant, but that's how I see it.
Okay. Look, I'm Nietzsche, and this is basically what Nietzsche meant by the death of God. Yeah, the death of God is to Nietzsche a tragedy, which because all of our morality, all of the virtues, everything was based on God, and so Nietzsche said, okay, God is dead. We can't go back. We need to create new values, and we are in this world where we need to always create, always be on guard against the dangers of this. We are in the unknown. Yeah, we're in this world where we need to always create new values that will maintain the morality, the freedom, the virtue.
For me, it just seems like the liberal propositions aren't working anymore, right? Like, what guarantee do I have? Like, if a progressive tells me that, like, oh, he'll never like think that my YouTube channel is hate speech, that guarantee lasts for about 3 days before he's coming to my speech and telling me he's going to take it away. None of these guarantees seem like they have any basis anymore, and that's the real problem we find ourselves in. Like, the word of a progressive in this regard means nothing to me anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So you need to fight back. It's always the question of are there enough good people to fight back? And I don't think those progressives are that strong. I think we're going to defeat them. So again, that's my optimism, and it's based on the fact that, again, like I said, when I listen to all those people, I don't hear them holding radical views, and the SJWs who are radicals, but most of the people who are responsible for the things that are going on, who are in the positions of power, don't hold those values. They're just being taken for a ride right now, and that's why I'm optimistic.
I respect that. I know I'm a pessimist, right? I see the progressives as being the SJWs as being very, very, very powerful, and I but maybe we'll defeat them really quickly, right? That's what it would require. It would require us defeating the SJWs in really short order, because as they are as what they're doing right now is corroding away all trust I have in America to deliver on its promises. And they're corroding away the symbols that will cause people to actually stand up and fight for America.
Well, you know, there's an interesting thing. It seems to me that a lot the thing that you think will help to defeat the SJWs seems to me at the same time to form something of a critique of your position, because the thing that you seem to be saying will help to defeat the SJWs is that their constant churn, and they are burning fast, you know, constantly shifting positions, and things that had been orthodox are now heretical at an ever-increasing pace. And most human beings can't stand change happening that quickly. They emotionally speaking, need greater stability than exists, and people are going to burn out, seems to be your position. But that very fact is something of a defeater for the argument you gave in favor of tolerating other people's speech. Because what you gave in favor of tolerating people's speech is roughly that you need a constant stream of change so that you don't stagnate. But if people really wanted that, they wouldn't grow tired of the one thing you can't say about modern social justice warriors is that they're stagnating. They're definitely not doing that. And so it seems to me there's a tension there between those two ideas that you've proposed, that in general people's preference for stability, because people are often relatively plastic. They'll adapt as necessary in order to find some stability for a great many people. With there's a minority of people who thrive on more difficult circumstances, and there's a much larger majority of people who will adapt to whatever in order to find stability. And so I think there is a problem in the spread of liberal democracy. They're in that large group of people who want stability and who probably would be fairly happy to trade restrictions on speech and other similar things to a narrow range of acceptable topics in order to get that sort of stability that is the reason that social justice warriors may well wear out their welcome.
Yeah. Okay. People are different. Yeah. Some people want stability. Other people are more inclined to change. And I think basically conservatives are those who are more inclined for stability, and liberals are more inclined to change, and the progressives are just the dark side of this. I don't like to talk, because I think some progressives have good ideas, so I call them regressives. Those who basically hold radical ideas of utopianism. Yes, they are those SJWs are like me in that they are constantly changing, but for different reasons. And but because there's a lot of people who are like me, who are liberal, what I call liberal, the conservatives, I think we have the strength in number to defeat those regressives, those SJWs, that are basically, when they are changing things, they are always changing it from the perspective of getting to the utopia. Yeah, that they're always looking what is the thing that is causing the inequality. Something needs to be blamed here for the fact that we have inequality. And once they find the thing that they think the things that needs to be blamed, they're trying to censor it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, though, I don't say that we can't necessarily beat these guys before they do a death blow to the societies that they belong in, but I mean, they are currently really undermining the societies that they're culturally controlling now. I mean, I need to mention the sort of current events here, but I mean, to my mind, and maybe this is just overly pessimistic, I mean, the SJWs they're taking the very things that the founding fathers thought was necessary to have a republic, and they're sort of undermining them, right? And these are like, the religious and cultural organizations, the ideas that you understand what Americans have in common, even things like the flag, for instance, right? I mean, so now we live in a society where on any given month, if progressives think that something particularly egregious happened, like half the football players won't stand up for the national anthem. So as a conservative, right, should I take that to mean that their displeasure with America over police brutality is greater than my displeasure over abortion? Maybe I shouldn't stand for the national anthem because we kill 1.3 infants every year with abortions. And so, then the conservatives stop not standing, and then pretty soon you have a dead symbol. And these things slowly undermine the ability to function inside of a nation like the United States. And the same thing is true in Europe. I mean, the immigration is slowly going to corrode, without assimilation, I may add, it's slowly going to corrode away the institutional trust these European nations rely on.
It's again, but the thing is, it's not the first time that this has happened. And you had, if you look at the late 60s, early 70s, you had a similar situation, and eventually people got tired of this, and just then Reagan and Thatcher happened. Yeah.
I'm not sure. Did you have like huge, massive immigration waves into Europe in the 60s and 70s, like you do now?
You did. I mean, they were complaining about.
I'm not so sure you did to the rate.
No, they had immigration, and they were complaining about it back then as well. And
you had the Gastarbeiter program, but that's totally different than what we're seeing now.
There was the rise of the National Front in England and in Britain in the late 70s as a reaction.
I think you'd be hard pressed to see something in the 60s like what you're seeing demographically right now. You had a small guest worker program in these countries, you had
all the after colonialism, all the people from the colonies started to come in, and
although to be fair to Alad's point, I think you didn't have the demographic issue to the same degree, I think, but you did have the post-war collapse of trust in institutions within Europe. Europe was culturally a very desolate place in the immediate aftermath of World War II, where Germany was halfway, to leveled in a physical sense. I mean, so many buildings were just smashed down, and there was, throughout England and Europe, a massive loss of faith in public institutions that really hit incredibly hard and took a while to even partially recover from. I mean, Europe's still, to agree, reeling from the war, is my understanding.
Yeah, okay, so and there was a recovery in the 60s, but and then and again, I'm not saying it's the same, but there was a lot of talk about immigration back then as well, and a lot of and the rise of right wing because of it, of extreme right wing because of it.
But now you don't just have the rise of the right wing, you're going to have the rise of Islamist parties in Europe and the right wing at the same time.
And okay, I think that's a problem. But like I tell people, I live in Israel. In Israel, we have 18%
strict immigration policy.
Yeah, but 18% of the population is Muslim, which in Europe it's going to take many decades to get to that. And the Muslims are not in control here. So
look, Israel. If Europe was running itself the way that Israel was,
and I think
its problems would be over. Israel has its immigration policy explicitly set up to discourage the idea in the minds of the Muslims that there'll ever be a majority. The way that Europe has its immigration policy set up, all of the Muslim, I've talked to Muslims in Europe, and they all think, and look, Muslim leaders like Erdogan will say this, that they are going to have a majority in a lot of these countries soon, right? Which is that's an attitude that the Israel government sets up its immigration policy and its school system explicitly to discourage.
Yes,
right.
And I think,
this is something that is qualitatively different.
And I think that this will happen in Europe, and there's still time for it. That's what I'm saying.
Here's another thing. I'm glad you brought this up, because this is part of my irritation with these people. I forget the name of the woman who was the moderate Muslim in your video, but people like that. I'm sorry, I'm going to be very unpolitically correct. They drive me up the wall, right? Because they go on. So she's like a moderate Saudi Saudi woman, and she talks about her experiences wanting liberty. And these moderate Muslims, they go on speaking tours and they tell Western leaders that Muslims just want freedom and they're just one like pop culture consumption habit away from becoming just like their citizens and blah, 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 blah. I want to say this really quickly. Your government is smart enough to know that that's bullshit.
Bullshit, yes.
Your government does not listen to people like that and go, oh, I bet every Palestinian thinks just like her. No, they listen to people like that and they go to people like Erdogan, like the leaders of Hamas, like Hezbollah, and go, well, what are the leaders saying? Oh, I guess they don't all think like that. So we won't set up our, war policy, our immigration policy to conform itself to that idea. But the leaders in Europe and the leaders in America listen to people like that and build their entire immigration policy around the assumption that she's more representative than the actual rulers of her country, than the actual rulers of Turkey, than the actual people who create culture in those countries. And for me, that's incredibly frustrating. And they do this in the name of liberalism.
Yes, 10 years ago, I had that same frustration. I still have it, but when I was talking to Europeans, indeed, every one of them would think like that. They would basically think that the idea is that it's just a question of environment. The Muslims are just, everybody is just like them, and you just need to change the environment, get them out of the if you take them out of the dictatorial system that they're in and put them in a democratic system, they will switch like that and become free people who think like free people. Yes, democratic people.
This is something that Europe, that Merkel believes, and Benjamin who does not believe.
Yeah. Right. And by the way, it's left and right. It's also the neocons on the right. Okay, they came from the left, and that's why it happened.
This is why I fundamentally desire to have leaders that think more like your leaders and less like the left and the right in my country.
Yeah.
Because I think that your leaders have the right idea. I think that they're thinking in a proper way about the future of their people in a way that I think, like you said, both the left and the right in the West is fundamentally incapable of thinking. And it's fundamentally incapable of thinking this way because of 2 or 3 decades of really bad ideas.
Yeah. I'll just point out that you said that the Muslims think that they're going to take over Europe. The Arabs here talked the same because they had this high birth rate. They thought that they will eventually be the majority.
Yeah.
The Israeli government did something that the child support of used to be higher, so you could basically turn making children into a career. So the government changed that, not just because of the Arabs, but also because of the Orthodox Jews who are also doing the same things, and as a result, but not only because of that, but also because it's a thing that's going on all over the Arab world. The birth rate of the Arabs has decreased and is now at the same level as the Jews.
And that relies essentially on a high Jewish birth rate. It also relies on an immigration policy that pretty much only lets Jewish people into that country.
No, I'm talking just about the birth rate. The birth rate is now the same for Arabs and Jews.
Yeah, between birth rate, okay, but yeah, birth rate's going to get it to you. But frankly, the birth rate in this country would get it to conservative Christians without immigration, right? So at the end of the day, the important thing is that the Muslims in that country do not think they're going to imminently become the majority population, which is the essential thing.
Yeah. And so and I think, like I said, that there's still time for Europe to implement such policies. And like I said, 10 years ago, all Europeans thought like that. But now I'm seeing a difference. Now I'm seeing Europeans think to wake up and realize that they need to do something. So that's why
I think it would take a revolution, right? It would take a revolution.
I really don't think so.
The great thing about democracies, your revolutions don't have to involve shooting a lot of people.
Yeah,
a revolution to get Germans to think the way that Israel do is something that is culturally.
When the French see that Marine Le Pen is coming close to be the president, they will say, okay, we need to do something against this. We need to implement some of the changes that these people want that vote for Le Pen.
Hold on,
otherwise,
though. I mean, Marine Le Pen's position, from my understanding of it, would have her far, 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 far to the left of even the Labour candidate in Israel. And that's not even taking consideration Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, Marine Le Pen is to the left of the current Prime Minister of Israel.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm not that familiar with her, but what I'm saying is that the changes are happening. It takes time to steer the ship around. I see, but there is still time. That's what I'm saying. You still have only about 6% Muslims. In Israel, you have 18%. Yeah, so it's not like Europe is going to die tomorrow. So. Because I think people do have a sense of self-preservation, and like you said before, that they will adjust to new things, and when they see, but they do have a self-preservation. So when they see a danger, they will adjust to something that will maybe be against their values, so it will be something that will mainly maintain the values, but will also maintain the self-preservation.
It's hard to see where that's going to come from in most of these Western European. It's hard to see where it's going to come from in most of these Western European countries.
That's a question of human nature, which apparently I'm a little more optimistic about than you are.
You think that this is going to? I mean, I could. That you were. I'm a big pessimist, so you're not going to get. You're not going to get. I know I'm temperamentally disinclined to see to sort of rely on sort of abstract forces, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Although, am I correct in guessing a lot that or would it be fairly accurate to summarize your position as that since there is time before the radical changeover in population, that that gives time for the amount of pain felt to increase, and pain is a remarkably good persuader?
Pain and fear.
Pain metaphorically speaking, not literal pain. But that is to say that as different cultural forces come in and people don't like them, that is, metaphorically speaking, pain, and that as the population of people with a different culture increases and are not assimilating, that produces additional, sort of cultural pain.
Definitely.
And so that's the sort of thing that will make people, that cultural pain, that's what I mean by pain being a great persuader, is that when problems look more imminent, people become much more open to much more significant changes.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. When they start to feel the fear of the world, disappearing, the world dying, they will do something about it. And already, I mean, you see even the Swedish government saying that we're not taking any more immigrants in, and we're going to send some back. So I'm seeing the change beginning to happen. Look, here in Israel, Israelis have been talking for like 20 years about the fact that Europe is dying, that the Muslims are taking over Europe. And I was telling them, the Europeans, it's not going to die this fast, and the Europeans are going to wake up sometime at some point. And,
one can hope, right? But the question is, the institutions are so thoroughly dominated by these things that it's hard to see how. I mean, Merkel got essentially reelected, right?
Yeah. They're still not. They still don't feel enough fear.
I mean, there's going to be a cultural change, and I guess what I'm saying is the culture that's going to drive this cultural change is going to be something that is going to look a lot more like the older Christian culture and a lot less like the pop culture where you totally create your own world, and sex is kind of the primary thing that you go after.
I agree. I agree that the change will come from the right, from the conservatives, but it will only happen because there will be enough people on the left who will say, yeah, this is something that needs to be done.
Well, no. Here's a question though. If demographic shifts and the associated threat and cultural changes and so on do stimulate this sort of change, the question comes up of how will the people you term the aggressive left adapt to this, because they're not just going to, if things shift against them in their present positions, they're not just going to throw up their hands and say, oh, well, it was nice having power, but someone else's turn. They're going to make some adaptations to this. And one thing that comes to mind is that while they're all generally sold on international socialism, there is another variant of socialism if you need to start protecting your borders heavily. And so the national socialism, being the alternative to international socialism, if you're still really keen on the socialism part, is not well known for being all that pro-freedom either. But it could be, in fact, a particularly good way of adapting to preventing the sort of cultural changes that you're talking about being a significant driver in the near future. So why would you not see that as happening?
You think that the SJWs are going to turn National Socialist, or that
if enough of say the populations of Europe, America's a little different, but I suppose even here, if they felt if the population generally started to have the fear that you were describing of population shifts, and so there became much more of a nationalist sentiment that that nations need to preserve their national character more, and that this being a loose description of stronger policies that are restricting immigration. Do you think that the SJWs would not adapt in that sort of direction? Because it wouldn't be all that major a shift for them.
I think that there is a danger of strong national socialism coming back. I think that one thing that will prevent it is the memory of what happened last time. So people will say, "Hey, we don't want to go that far. Let's adopt a more. Let's do what Israel is doing. Yeah, let's learn from Israel. Things like that. We don't need to go full Nazi for to solve the problem." Yeah.
Well, I think that might be a good lesson. If pardon me. Oh yeah, sorry, I interrupted without having anything to say. I was just thinking of sort of Israel's border wall and then connecting it to Trump or whatever. But
yeah,
sorry. So I think we're sort of at an agreement that moderation is needed. I guess nothing is really going to stop me from believing that. I think the question I have, just to give, and we're probably almost done, but the final thing I have, it seems to me that sort of the skeptics and the liberals like Sargon and you and Kraut T, the next step they need to make is, in my opinion, they have to find something to fight for that's not just freedom, right? We have to start talking about the true, the good, and the beautiful. What's virtuous? What's a worldview that can inculcate virtue, right? Because I think that whatever the path forward is to get to this more moderate position where, Europe perhaps takes a leap out of Israel's page and becomes more sane, it's going to be brought about by people. It's not going to be brought about by people who think that the only thing worth fighting for is freedom and, lack of restriction, I guess. Maybe, I don't know, do you see that maybe the skeptic community might try to, examine some of these positive beliefs and see if they can incorporate them in their worldview?
Well, I actually said that in my video. Focus on making culture, and I am in my channel talking a lot about culture. Series that I'm doing about psychedelia, about the 60s, which is about culture, but also about what happened politically, because I think we can learn from that. And I happen to be an expert on this subject, and so I'm doing this series. I have a lot of other things coming up. I'm going to do a series on. Well, okay, this is coming, but there's something about The Godfather that I'm going to do about the movie, and about there's a lot of things that I'm going to do.
I'm actually thinking along the same lines of doing a lot of cultural stuff, to tell you the truth. I think it's sort of a critical dimension that we've left out of our perspective. One thing I'm actually hoping to do, and I'll probably release a little bit of an imitation video, I'm hoping to sort of engage the skeptic community by having them on for conversations about virtue and culture and positive worldviews. And I'm hoping that more people will sort of take us up on certain conversations in that dimension.
Yeah, that's good. Look, like I said, I'm coming from an Nietzschean perspective that says God is dead and we need to create values that are fit for the for this world, for this godless world. Now, for you, God is not dead apparently, and I think that's a good thing. Yeah, I think that's a good thing that there are still people who have that kind of virtue, and basically what I say is religion is a good thing as long as it doesn't get too politically strong, just like just like Marxism, or because that is true. Then the religious become utopian. Yeah, then they try to enforce the ideas of heaven. But yeah, I mean Christianity is a tried and tested thing that has held for 2,000 years, and so if you keep it in a state where it is just cultural and doesn't have too much political power, it is a force for good. So is Judaism. And you have to have people like me, which will appeal to those who do not believe in God and try to offer values, other values, which I will do on my channel. Is something that I'm developing. It's a life project of mine to try to offer what are the values that fit the time, and there are answers, and people are working on it. So you have, I mean, you have in the liberal community basically you have morality. Yeah, you have people who are creating moral systems and all that. The secular liberal community. So I think that's a very important thing, and this is something that I was saying from the start when I came in beginning of 2016. I said, look, we are focusing on what's wrong. Let's start to talk about what should be.
Can I throw in one more question before we end?
Yeah, go ahead. We have I think we'll just do 10 more minutes or so. I don't know. Does the chat want to ask any questions? I think we kind of boiled my questions down to the fact that I'm an incurable pessimist and that I admire Israel's ability to manage its affairs. But let's sorry, go ahead, ask questions. Maybe the chat can ask some questions too, I guess.
Okay, so my question, Elad, would be what in your quest to create values for people, it seems to me that we're already getting chemical answers to that same problem, in that heroin is a remarkably persuasive value, as is copious amounts of marijuana. And so it seems to me that a problem for the freedom going forward from the need to create values is that there are a lot of people who seem to be fairly content with smoking a rather large amount of marijuana and supporting anybody who will make this very doable for them, who don't really care at all about things like freedom of speech, because they're not really going to be talking very much, or if they are, no one's going to be listening to them, because potheads are astonishingly boring people. Well, hi.
Well, I think most people will not go for marijuana because they don't want to live like zombies. Yeah, they understand, because we have a pretty good life here now, and you can live a long and happy life. And you're not going to do that if you're going to inject heroin. And people know that now. They maybe they didn't really know it in the 60s, but they do know it now. So this is the type of thing that people just know that it's not in the long run not going to lead them anywhere. So there's not going to be a lot of people who will who just go into this hedonistic avenues, you know, like drugs or all the others, or gambling, or
promiscuous sex.
Yeah, Yeah, promiscuous sex in the 60s and 70s, there were some people who were doing it in copious amounts, and it led to AIDS and all that, and they learned the lesson. It's not that cool anymore.
I'm sorry, but as a part comes from California, did they? I'm sorry. Sorry. I knew I was going to shut up, but I mean, we just passed a law in California that essentially decriminalizes spreading AIDS. Why was that law passed necessary? Well, it was passed because there's a certain segment of the gay community that is actually okay with getting AIDS, surprisingly enough, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really follow why this happened, but look, today there's a thing that is called sex addict, which if you ask people in the 70s, what do you mean sex addict? Have as much sex as that's what you're living for, isn't it? To have as much sex as you can. Today it's not that popular to be a fiend, a sexual fiend who just has sex all the time.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, we definitely like describing it in terms of addiction, and arguably it could have been worse in the 70s. I wasn't alive then, so.
So I just got the impression that the sexual addiction thing was a means of coping with people who weren't okay with what you're doing, and so by medicalizing it, it takes it out of the realm of personal responsibility, and so that you. Instead of damaging, basically, if you don't have the ability to make reparations for sins in any real way, by medicalizing it, you take it out of the realm of I have done something wrong by cheating on my wife and my mistresses, and so there's a chance that they will forgive me if I then go through and essentially seek the ritual purity of going through the medical system. So I took it to be more that way than as a cultural shift, thinking that copious amounts of sex is actually wrong. And I bring up sex in part because it's a wonderful drug. The actual euphoric portion being endogenously produced, you can never overdose. It's got certain limiting factors, so you'll actually show up to your work. At least most people can.
It has sexual diseases. It has venereal diseases.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there is, however, the myth of the all-powerful condom that will keep everybody safe.
Anyway, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. The fact is that I'm not seeing people just sleeping around. It's not something that is that popular. Maybe when they are very young, there's this stage where you have that stage where you have a lot of sex, and then then you go and become an adult. And that's basically what's happening. And I think I said before in the 70s, I should note that people who were having a lot of sex in the 70s, it was a small group. Most people were still quite conservative, but it was a small group, and we learned what they came out saying is that it's not that good. And people today are not secular people, are not that enamored by the idea of just having copious sex all the time.
Yeah, I've talked way too much about the sexual revolution, so I'm just going to shut up about that. I don't know any more thoughts, Zarathustra. I'm sort of out of ideas.
Like I said, it's I didn't think we were going to agree because we have a fundamental difference in I think in how we perceive human nature.
I think we agree more than I thought.
So I think it was a good talk.
Yeah, thanks a lot for showing up, man. I liked the video despite the fact that I gave it a lot of crap. Pardon my swearing, excuse me. But I thought it was good, and I really appreciate you coming on. I hope I wasn't too caustic in my approach, but I thought it was. I think the fundamental thing is that you're just an optimist, and I'm most certainly not, guys. Warning for everyone watching my channel. So, Chris, do you have any last things to say, or before we?
Well, I've always been sort of clarificational in this. I mean, my response to you is a self-clarificational. So,
I really liked your take about this being sort of a foundation myth. I totally missed that angle, and I wanted to thank you about that. It was an insight I didn't have. So, thanks.
Oh, well, and actually that ties in very well to the Nietzschean theme. The creation, the foundation myths, it doesn't really matter whether or not they're true, and it does tie in well to the creation of values, that a foundation myth, by giving a narrative, can help to create a value in people's mind.
Yeah. Anyway, so I think I'm going to close down the conversation here, and I'm just going to post the Discord link in the chat. I'll be on very briefly if anyone wants to contact me privately. But anyway, thank you so much for the people who showed up to this talk. And hold on, let me. I hope to have you guys back to discuss again. Thanks again, Zarathustra Serpent. A lot of really great insight there. And I'll talk to you guys later, okay?
Yeah, bye.
All right, bye.
God bless.